Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, the podcast designed for heads of school, principals, and anyone else who's interested in advancing and enhancing Jewish education. I am thrilled to have with us today an old friend and colleague who has been doing some amazing and more amazing things as she's developed in her career and her organization. Very pleased to welcome Gali Cooks, the CEO of Leading Edge, an organization that's fundamentally designed to leveling up what leaders on the professional and lay side are doing for Jewish organizations across the span. So, Gali, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure to be here and right on point. Like, that was a great intro. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have been following. I really have. And the truth is that for those listening, this conversation actually stems out of a piece that Gali wrote and a piece that I wrote in response, which were really focused on one of the hardest topics for leaders, which is how do you give feedback? And especially in the nonprofit world, where most of us got into this because we were nice. We'd like to do good. We like to be kind. And that's all true and valid. But Gali, in her article, which was published in the Harvard Business Review, made some crucial points about where that can go wrong. So in case anyone's not reading every issue of HBR, can you just give us the quick version of what you were aiming at in that article? I'll share some of my responses and we'll try and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this was a co-authored piece by the absolutely incredible Ron Ashkenaz, who is a lay leader and leader in his own right and an organizational development expert, who has been in many ways a mentor and thought partner to me and has worked exclusively almost in the private sector. I mean, certainly professionally. And this piece came about because we were talking, as Barry, you and I sometimes talk, and just, talking about some of the themes that we see. And one of the things that I mentioned to him was feedback is so critical on the job, in the moment, once you get in the balcony. And we were just not doing a good job of it in the Jewish nonprofit sector. And it felt so sector specific. And he was like, no, everyone has this issue. Everyone has this issue, from big multinational to smaller startup on the private sector to public sector organizations. It's just a human issue, which we believe that humans do want to be kind and are collaborative kind of creatures. And so we started talking about that. And we have a lot of data at Leading Edge that we gather every year. And in the 10 years that we've been around, certainly has compounded and affirmed that one of the best ways to create an organization where people can be leveled up and maximize their potential is through feedback and that management of enabling to grow and whatnot. And so we came about this piece, which basically contends that giving that kind of feedback is hard. It stems from the human wanting to be nice and in some cases not confrontational. And we brought in the nonprofit examples, which is certainly within the nonprofit organization, but also on the board side. How many boards do we know that don't hold the head of school or the CEO accountable to any metrics, let alone any sort of goal-related kind of performance conversation? And also the fact that the Jewish nonprofit sector is somewhat different in that the physics of our sector are kind of family business industry. And so we started talking about that. And the piece contends really that we are not doing anyone any favors by shirking those kinds of conversations, by not being clear on what are the goals and what are the specific outcomes that we're working toward, by respecting that people who come to work choose that path and therefore want to have meaning in their day and feel like they're making progress. And you can't have that unless you know where you want to go, what are some of the ways qualitatively and quantitatively that we need to get there. And so we lay out some of the markers of being able to hold leaders accountable to that because, the culture of an organization really flows from leadership. We know that. We see that in, it's not popular to say because we like to think of a flat meritocratic kind of organism, but that is not the way that organizations are structured. And so if the leadership is bought in and has that sort of muscle and is held accountable, that will flow down. and having different incentives in place and also practices in place that are very feedback driven, goal driven, so that everyone can be on the same page. And in some cases, make the implicit explicit and then, hold yourself accountable to that.
Okay, so I love all of this, and I'll say it happens to be today before we recorded. I had conversations with two separate leaders. It's towards the end of the school year, and both of them were saying to me, I knew I should give this person feedback. I didn't do it. I don't think I can rehire them, and they're going to have no idea why. So, what I'm seeing is leaders saying, I know I should.
Hmm.
I know I should, but then they don't.
Yeah.
And they don't because, like, it's so awkward and it's so challenging. And I'd love for you to give us a little bit more about how you work to manage that, because it sounds to me like you're saying, okay, the right way to do this is not by starting with the feedback, it's almost starting by the feed forward,
Yeah.
saying, where are you going? And now we have a context on upon which I can start to give you feedback that feels a little bit less awkward because we already set the groundwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Field forward. I love it. Exactly. The feedback piece is secondary, tertiary. It's really about mapping out where are you going? What is the purpose of your role? Having that clarity of purpose and knowing that there needs to be prioritization there. Quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, the school year, there are different ways in which different markers are going to be hit. And so that clarity of of priorities, of goals, super hard, especially in our business, which is not quantitative by design in many ways. You educate a
Mhm.
child and the whole, you don't want to teach to the test. That's
Right.
that's 101. So then what does that mean in terms of some of the growth and growth mindset sort of outcomes and frankly outputs that you want to be able to manifest? So the first is really that clarity of this is the role of the individual, this is their place also within the organization, and then having that discipline to go back to some of those priorities and also change them in real time. Like there does need to be certain processes where, it could be that you had 25 goals for the first half of the year and that just burned people out or diluted,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. So there is absolutely that moment of just again making that implicit explicit. We're here to teach our kids. Okay, come on now. What is that? Right, what does that mean? And honestly, the field of education and Jewish education is so much more advanced in that because we do know what it takes for a second grader to matriculate to a third grader at some, base level. And you can measure progress in these years that are so pliable of the students and also just in terms of teacher readiness and the ways in which the curriculum, how they actually bring that in. So really it is that feed forward. It's just the
Right.
clarity of role and expectations.
And I love the comparison to the education world. I think you might be giving schools a little bit too much credit. And I love schools, but I'll explain, right? We actually do a pretty good job of curriculum for kids.
Hmm.
And we know we've got standards, we've got benchmarks, and that's wonderful. But now say, okay, so what do we expect the teacher to do?
Mm. Mhm.
And then how do we figure out if the teacher's doing that when, if I'm a principal and I've got 40 teachers and I've got a couple other things to do and maybe a parent phone call on occasion, right? So, how much time can I actually spend in teacher classes? When I'm in there, what do I see? And then how do I give them that feedback? And those are kind of some of my thoughts as I was reading your article of
Yeah.
we've got to get here, but it is really that level of challenging. And I imagine on the organizational level, some of what you might be training people to do is say, okay, let's define what success looks like in your role.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm curious if you have any examples of how somebody took a really tricky, really, cloudy area and said, I'm going to make sense of this, lay this out so that this person can be successful and so that I can give them that feedback in context.
Yeah. The reason why I've been giving, especially schools and education space, the kind of kavod is because the best managers are teachers. Through and
Okay.
truly,
Teachers in their classrooms of kids.
or teachers within their mahut, within their essence.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you think about it, being a manager is maximize the potential of whoever you're working with. That could be a student, that could be a first time professional, that could be a first time middle manager. You know what I mean? So even just that mindset is super transformative because you're not
Mhm.
looking for a fully formed, complete individual, knowing that the business that we're in, there is no one answer. There's a constant moving target. The world is frankly changing more quickly than ever. So there is something about that essence of a growth mindset, constant learning, that kind of thing. In terms of some of the case studies or the best case kind of examples, I will say the first step, and I'm married to a therapist, so maybe this is like it's clouding the kind of metaphors, but the first thing that needs to be named is naming it to taming it, meaning to be able to say, we actually haven't done this as well as we should have. And we know that because we are either measuring ourselves, like one of the things that we believe in is you manage what you measure. Even if it's, subjective and gray and human, like there are ways to be able to know here are some of the ways that I'm at par, here are some of the ways that I'm better or worse or, growing, that kind of thing. So first is naming it, being able to say, my job here is to make sure that you thrive or that you're the best teacher and that kind of thing. Some of it is just taking that time to be able to do that. And we've seen that be very effective actually of an organization, let's say taking an employee engagement survey, some sort of survey that's universal, that isn't specially like just a survey monkey to folks, but that is something that is designed to know these are the critical paths and the critical elements of getting a person to maximize their potential professionally. How are we in all of these different metrics? Some are more important than others. Leadership, confidence in leadership is incredibly powerful. A sense of belonging, very important to being able to bring your best self to work. Psychological safeties and management. So there are those elements. But the ways that we've seen it are folks who have made this a priority and have said, I am going to take some time. Yes, there's an opportunity cost for it, for sure, but
Mhm.
the amount of time that you're going to put today is going to yield dividends because you are setting somebody up to be able to ultimately, you know, thrive in their role.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I go back to something that I learned from a mentor way back when I was a division head at camp, who said to me on the first day, right? The one thing you need to tell the counselors working for you, and you need to do this, is that your job is simply to help them do their jobs better. That's it.
That's beautiful.
And, that was more years ago than I care to count, but I use it every time I'm speaking to supervisors, and I love the connection to a teacher in the classroom. And if that's our job and that's what we're trying to build, then we also have to be really clear about what it means to get there. And we have to take some time at the outset to start doing it. So you mentioned your leading edges survey. I've actually had the opportunity in a couple of schools that I've worked with to use the results of that survey. And I would encourage, if you're a school and organization and you haven't done this survey, go on the website, figure out how to sign yourselves up for it, because it provides you with really valuable data. Not every question is going to provide the same insight to every place, but within that universe of data, there will be something that's helpful. And part of what came out of it for the school that I happen to be working with on this one was, you know, we don't actually ever set goals for our teachers.
Hmm,
We evaluate them at the end of the year on how well they've done. But setting goals is a really, like, at the beginning of the year is really hectic. How do we sit down? How do we do this? And the question I often get then is, well, what if the teacher wants a goal that's not a good goal? What if my, supervisee wants a goal that's not great? And so my job is obviously to work people through that process.
mhm,
But throwing it back to you, I'm curious, what are your perspectives and insights on that goal setting process,
mhm.
the best ways to do it, and how it functions as part of this whole feedback cycle?
Yeah, it's such a great point because on the one hand, you want to be able to get buy-in and real thought from the team, from the person that you're managing, from endorsement of leadership to be able to say, yes, resolved and agreed. These are the goals. But we know that sometimes there isn't alignment in that. The way that we approach that is A, just taking the time to have some conversations that maybe are not specifically concrete. That's already a win. The second is what we advise organizations, and this is usually indirect because we do like to have more of, the berries of the world go out and have one-on-one, one organization to have a very skilled consultant to be able to shepherd and make sense and prioritize. And this is a process. Like this is behavior change. You're asking people, to change their minds, their hearts, their actions. And that takes time to get embedded. And you need a coach. You need, someone who's going to force you to do the things. So when we talk about setting goals, look, the person who, let's say the person that you manage, they have to have a voice, but they don't have to have a vote and certainly not a veto. I mean, there are certain things, this is work, and there are certain
Mhm.
things that none of us wants to do or enjoys doing, but they need to get done. And, I had a volleyball coach back in high school where, he used to say you can't take the fun out of fundamentals. There is that relationship of like, this could be so much fun, but we have to have a baseline foundational level of operation and prioritization. And sometimes that's not fun. And sometimes that isn't the strength of the person that you are managing. So that's usually how we try to navigate. But there is no complete template. Like one of the things that we love about the survey, which it is a survey that is offered. I mean, 2/3 of it is offered to any kind of company, any type of organization, public, private, nonprofit. We amended it to the Jewish nonprofit sector because there are certain things that are different for us in a good, a bad, a different kind of way. And one of the things is that you really do see what are the highest leverage points where, let's say, if I were to tackle that domino, oh, that would make that would have a ripple of impact that would be so positive, and therefore I wouldn't have to work on the 9 things that would flow from there. S
Okay, so now you pique my curiosity. What are some of those dominoes
Yeah,
that knock all the other ones down? What
yeah.
have you seen?
Yeah, well, I will say, so we've done this survey now for 10 years and changed probably like 10 to 15% of the questions, but they're pretty constant in terms of just what we ask employees about their experience at work. And one of the things that has popped up, there are 85 questions generally or thereabouts, and there are usually 5 that are the key drivers of engagement and people's ability to thrive and do their work at their best. It starts with leadership. There's no doubt. It's leadership,
Mhm.
confidence in leadership, and two-way communication. Open and honest two-way
Okay.
communication. There is a direct and very strong correlation between teams having confidence in their leadership and teams actually having leadership communicate with them. And that's, across the board. Yep, communication, super important.
Amazing.
Yeah,
And that goes against many leaders' tendencies, which I see, which is right. Something's going wrong. I'm worried about something. What am I going to do? I'm going to shield my staff from it.
right.
Now, right. Some of that is like self protection because I don't want to look dumb.
Yep.
But a lot of it really is my job is to shield my staff. If
Mhm.
the board's a mess, if there's an unknown, I'm gonna share less because it's my job as a leader to take care of this,
Yeah,
and that creates a lack of confidence and a lack of trust among staff. And it's so counterintuitive for leaders that we need to keep reminding and teaching people that that communication, that's actually what builds confidence.
exactly. Exactly. Incredibly well said. It doesn't mean that you have to bear all, in ways and say this happened.
No, don't do that.
But no, there is a constant drumbeat of communication, and it does have to be two-way, which is hard because that's usually moving against the current of just the design of most organizations. But there is a constant drumbeat and also just attention and intention to the fact that your employees should be one of your key stakeholders. And in some cases, if you're doing it right, should be your number one stakeholder because they are going to, therefore, engaged employees deliver superior results. That's
Yeah.
just direct. So, yeah,
Absolutely. And I think when we're talking about leaders at a CEO, executive director, head of school level, the employees that they're serving are doing very complex tasks. It's not just a rote, hey, do make that widget faster. They're engaging judgment, they're engaging with people, they're doing things that are legitimately hard. So the ability to have that communication and that back and forth, I think is huge. What I hear mostly from teachers and from mid-level leaders in schools is across the board, I wish my supervisor knew more about what I did. I
Mm,
wish my supervisor was in my classroom more, saw what I did more, because it gives me a feeling of validation. It allows me to get feedback, and it also, speaks to the elephant in the room of like, "Oh no, what are they thinking? They're never here." And on the other hand, you have the leader who's like, "Well, I don't really wanna bother them, and I feel bad, and I don't wanna step on anyone's toes," where it's the absolute wrong reaction to the
mhm.
situation. As a leader, you have to be there, and you have to be communicating in both those directions.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so well said, and we find those polarities, honestly, in almost every organization. Truly, because the CEO is like, "Oh no, they're going to, I'm going to freak them out by being in their classroom or by going to a program that they designed and doing a site visit or something like that." When in actuality, you're right. It means that there is a certain level of respect and attention and prioritization from the employee's perspective that the CEO is here, leadership is here, and more of a mindset that is about growth, that is about taking the time to understand like this is the business that we're in. And it's hard because there is look, you see this, and we talk to a lot of leaders, and as a leader, I can say time is the biggest constraint. I
Yeah.
mean, really, even more than resources. And that means that if you are a head of school or if you are a CEO of an organization or on the leadership team, it can be very challenging to carve out time to do one on ones with a team or a site visit or teach a class or that type of stuff. And that we do see from the, I mean, going back to your question around the prioritization, what are the highest leverage, the master dominoes, as it were, leadership and communication and being able to be in dialogue with your team so that then they see also that it's not just some proclamation, once a year at the end of the school year, this is what we're hoping to do over the summer and, welcome back for next year. But there's more of a conversation and authenticity. Like we leaders,
Yeah.
we don't have all the answers. In fact, we have many more questions than we have answers. So yeah, just being honest,
Yeah.
that is, goes a long way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think sometimes we misunderstand as leaders, and we're like, "Look, I can't do all these meetings because 'cause I've gotta get my work done." And when you get to a certain point in leadership, the meetings are your work, and the other stuff is the distraction. So, like, yeah, you gotta keep up with your emails and your messages. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, but the way you're transforming your organization is by spending time with your people. So if that's visiting classrooms, or if that's goal setting meetings, or if that's check-ins, it has to be there. And there was a point that I saw Dan Heath make in his book Reset, I believe, which was great leaders go and see the work. So
Mhm.
you're there and you're seeing it, but you're not micromanaging it. And that I think is really tricky and something else that people fear. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, how do you guide a leader to both see the work in detail, but avoid micromanaging it?
Yeah, that's again, those polarities are so real. And we see that especially with growing organizations or a CEO who somehow now has a leadership team. And so trying to think about, well, what are the ways in which my role and their roles, shift and can complement one another. There is an element of some of the system within the Jewish nonprofit sector is one that is designed to mitigate risk and failure. And that does mean that in some ways the incentives are to micromanage because one comma out of place could in some way, make the donor of the whatever, angry. And there isn't necessarily giving the benefit of the doubt or whatever else. And that is a shame because, like you said, they are setting the direction. And that
Mhm.
means that you do have to toggle between going to the dance floor and up on the balcony and, trying to make sense of things and clarify some of the ways in which you're going to get there. I mean, there's the adaptive leadership modality of direction, protection, order, and that type of thrust. There is no way that you can micromanage every detail or even whatever is right in front of you and do the big stuff as well. There is an opportunity
Right.
cost, and going back to time, it's just not elastic. Now I'm saying this as someone who is inflicted with this as well, as employee number one and the founder of Leading Edge. And now we're at 30 plus. It's hard to delegate, to empower, to be like, I wouldn't do it this way, but okay, let's go. And that is growing edge and part of what you want. I mean, part of leadership is creating a kind of community that's going to hold up whatever vision, make it part of what you want it to be, especially at a school, especially at, a national organization or a material one. Yeah, so that's
Yes.
the perspective.
Right. As I'm hearing you say that, I'm actually connecting in my mind to what you said earlier about the two-way communication, right? So what I'm thinking about is a leader who goes and sees what's going on and sees the details, but doesn't then say, "Hey, put that comma in a different spot." Rather says, "Hey, I see you did it this way. Explain to me
Yeah,
what your
why?
approach is.
Yeah,
Why'd you do that? I'll tell you why I might do it a little bit differently." And we'll elevate the discussion to like a real discussion about leadership strategy, hopefully not about commas, but really elevate it. But that's the trick, right? The answer is not avoiding seeing the details and staying in your office. And the answer is not dictating every detail. The answer is getting close enough to the work and pairing that with exactly the kind of two-way communication that you were talking about earlier.
yeah, exactly. And being aware that as CEO or as head of school, your words carry a tremendous amount of weight. And
Yes,
that awareness and curiosity, um, sorry, are great mindsets.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then that awareness and that curiosity, I think, are huge. The idea that you as a supervisor approach what your employees are doing from a place of curiosity rather than a place of correction and fixing
Mhm.
changes everything. Now, and I'll be honest, in my own experience, people don't always believe you when you're being curious the first time. Like, oh, this is a setup. You're asking me why I did that, but more in the why did you do that? Right? Why would you think that was a good idea? And you really have to work to get to a place where they understand you're curious about what they're doing.
Exactly. And undergirding all of this is trust. Like, exactly that. You're trying to cultivate trust so that folks can bring their best self, can potentially, take some risks. Like you said, these jobs are not, there's not a clear recipe and a widget that we make. There are so many different directions. And in fact, you do want to bob and weave depending on who you're teaching or who the end user is, and not just copy and paste what you did last year and hope that it'll, yield a 2% return or whatever. So that trust is super important. And that's why the communication, being in constant dialogue. Look, also, information is the currency of our sector. It's
Hmm.
certainly not financial. It is about how much do I know and how can I grow and therefore how can I do my job better, which means that my days have meaning and purpose and are perpetuating the kind of tikkun olam or whatever, end stage that you want. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what people working in our sector want, whether they're right in a social service agency, a nonprofit, a federation, a school. That's what they're looking for. And that's what I see on any survey I've ever done with schools and your surveys that I've seen across the board. People are saying, I wish I saw my supervisor more,
Mhm.
not I wish I saw them less. And that I think is actually a great note to end on as we're wrapping things up and putting this together of how can you see your people more? And part of that is that we'll end this podcast so that people can go back to work. I really, Gali, I've admired what you've built over the last 10 years, even before, but certainly over the last 10 years with Leading Edge. I think has done such a service for leaders. I know that when I'm coaching or consulting with an individual organization, I love using the tools that you've given them as a foundation to build on. And I just want to, thank you for sharing your time with us. And if you don't mind, maybe you can even let people know how they can reach out to you or reach out to Leading Edge if they want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that, Barry. That's high praise and it means a great deal. And one of the things that we have tried to do is cultivate trust and, the kind of two-way dialogue that any organization that comes in and tries to support and level up people will need to have in order for it to actually stick. I will say that just by way of ending, and where hopefully we can continue some of these conversations with folks who are listening and certainly with you, is we going back to time being so precious. one of the things that we have learned over our last decade is that there are certain things that folks can focus on that are going to yield better results. So I mentioned some of them in terms of what we see in the survey. What we've done just recently, actually, and it's not necessarily ready for prime time, but we're hoping to be able to engage the field with, is codified some of that into standards of excellence
Wow.
and just said, look, in talent, culture, and boards, as it relates to building an organization where people are empowered to do their best, there are certain things that one can do. They're not rocket science. I mean, you'll see and you'll be like, Barry, duh, like, of course, but it's clarifying because it means you don't have to access that on your own and just say, okay, these are the most important ingredients. And in some cases, folks know and they can create their own recipes. And in some cases, they're going to need a meal kit. And, potentially there are other organizations that can provide that and will provide some of that. So I just wanted to note that as there are standards of excellence that we are going to be rolling out and sharing, I should say, with the field and hoping to engage folks. All of them are paired with all of the different programs and surveys and tools that we've created. And all of that can be found at leadingedge.org, just one word, .org. And folks can certainly reach out to me directly at my email as well, which is on our website as well.
Amazing. Amazing. So that is a great teaser. I for one am really interested to see. And we'll tell people, check the website, check back. If you're not subscribed to the newsletters and everything that comes out from Leading Edge, go ahead and do that. And also, as we always say at the end here, take something we've talked about and try it. So if you're ahead of school and it's the end of the school year and things are busy, let's figure out one way that you can spend a bit more time in a teacher's classroom with some of the people you supervise, thinking about goals for next year, because that really is the work. Your job is to help them all do their jobs better. I'd love you to try it, and I'd love you to let me know how it goes. And as always, you can reach me, Barry Kislowitz, on LinkedIn, Leadership Lenses on Substack, or at our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.